Now that I have the paper off, I'm ready to start scratching. I'm going to talk about the tools. You could use a lot of different kind of sharp tools. This is a traditional Scratchboard tool. Here is an X-Acto knife right here. You could use one of those. Here is an X-Acto knife that actually has a pin in the end that'll actually do a lot of fine, really thin lines. You could use a lot of different things. You could use, I've seen people use wooden styluses, toothpicks, things like that. The first thing I want to talk about before I actually start scratching on that Scratchboard is the technique of using a tool to scratch off this black emulsion or the black material that's on top of the Scratchboard. When you scratch, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the angle of your tool. Especially if you're like using a Scratchboard tool like this, if you decrease the angle a whole lot and you're basically using it on its side, it can make pretty wide lines. But if you increase the angle there, it's more up and down, now you're making thinner lines. It also depends on how much pressure you put down. If you just put a little bit of pressure, it kind of skips along there. It doesn't make sometimes the most uniform line, which means there's little, and this could be a good thing. Just it kind of depends on what you want to do. If you press harder, of course you can get wider and more uniform lines. That is, you scrape off all the black consistently. Now I would say this, it's very important. If you scrape really hard in one area and you keep going, it ends up scraping off whatever colors underneath it. This so happens to be a rainbow version. Sometimes I've seen them like glitter or different colors or gold or silver. You can actually keep scraping till it actually gets back to the paper and it just ends up being white. Now this could actually be a good thing. It just kind of depends on what you want to do. I usually recommend to not do this unless it's, for example, like the highlights in the eyes. I'll show you about that later. Here's the other thing I'm going to talk about is you're using a technique called hatching. Now hatching or cross-hatching is when you shade with lines. So this is very important. Right here, I'm going to create a darker value. Notice the lines are further apart and they're thinner. Now I'm going to create a lighter value right here. The lines are a lot closer and they're wider. So when I go back to my picture here of the wolf, around the snout here, this side where it's really light, I probably want to put those lines closer together. Of course, going in the same direction as the fur, but closer together so it reveals more of the background color. But for example, the snout, the nose right there on the tip, that's pretty dark, so I actually want to leave a lot of the black. Sometimes it's so dark you just end up leaving just the black. So I'll show you what this looks like on an actual Scratchboard. I'm going to start again in the ear. Now I notice that the ear in my picture is kind of dark around the edge. It gets lighter right here and darker in the middle again. So I'm going to show you what that'll actually look like. I'm going to put just a few lines, again going in the same direction as the fur, here on the edge. It's kind of a darker value. It's not completely black, it's just kind of darker. Then it gets a little bit lighter on the inside. Now notice I actually changed the direction of my scratch tool. Now I'm going this direction, the direction of the fur, and notice how the lines are closer together. There we go. That makes it a little bit lighter. Do remember, you can always go lighter, but you can't go darker. That's very important. I'll say that again. You can always go lighter, but you can't go darker. There we go. So it's going to get darker here, so I'm only going to put a few lines in here. That's the inside of the ear. Then it gets lighter again right here in this section. In some ways, it's like doing your drawing in reverse. So your pencil drawing, you added more pencil to make it darker. This time, you have to scrape more to make it lighter. So it's almost like, again, doing a reverse drawing. And I'm going to show you another example that I've been working on. This is my tiger example here. Notice the fur is going the same direction as the lines. So I have those lines going the direction that the fur goes. But also I use different length lines for shorter fur. I use shorter lines. For longer fur, I use longer lines. And I'm going to go ahead and scratch some more on this and just kind of show you. When I'm doing a stripe, for example, there's going to be a stripe that actually comes right down here. Sometimes it actually gets lighter. So it started off a little bit on the darker side up here, and then it gets lighter as it goes down, just like that. So, as I mentioned earlier, you can scrape through to the white if you really need to on the highlights of the eyes. So you see right there and right there, I actually scraped through the color just to put the highlights on the eyes, but I didn't do that anywhere else on the Scratchboard drawing. Do make sure as you're working, every once in a while you wipe off your hands like on your shirt or jeans or whatever, because the oils from your hands soak into the scratch board, and that actually makes it a lot harder. It soaks in and actually hardens this black material and makes it really hard to scrape off. Now, one thing I do want to show you as well is what an incorrect scratch board looks like. I've seen some scratch boards that are pretty rough like this one. People not following the direction of the fur, they kind of outline things. It doesn't really look like what they were trying to draw, and sometimes they're just being kind of scribbly like this. They're just not paying attention. Sometimes if you have a problem with your scratch tool scraping, you may want to again change the angle, change the direction in which you're scraping.